Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling the hearing. You know, anyone who is concerned about the rising costs and risks on American families and businesses should be pressing for ambitious investments in clean energy and public-private partnerships with clean energy companies. Solar power and wind power is a lot less expensive, has a much reduced impact on the air we breathe. And when it comes to biodiversity, we have a biodiversity crisis, and unless we tackle climate change, that biodiversity crisis is going to get a whole lot worse. Talk about rising costs because of climate. Just this year, we've had about 20 climate-fueled disasters. We've paid out over $109 billion already. So don't forget that part of the equation either. The good news is that here in America, we are blessed with abundant offshore wind resources on the Atlantic coast, off the Atlantic coast, and the Pacific coast. These resources can help bring lower cost, clean energy to millions of Americans. But we do have to build up the supply chains, as the witnesses have testified today. One element of it, I was excited to hear from Ørsted that a lot of the offshore vessels you're going to need are going to be built at shipyards around the country, including Port Tampa Bay. Is that still correct, Mr. Hardy?
Yes, it is.
Great. Well, and a couple of years ago, Congresswoman Elaine Luria and Bobby Scott and Don McEachin, they invited me to Norfolk, to the Port of Virginia. And it was so interesting to see the port executives there, their excitement for the potential to grow their port businesses and jobs there, because they really saw themselves as the place where the wind turbines could be assembled and the vessels could help build especially in the mid-Atlantic, the new offshore wind areas. How is that going in that area? And then what do you see? What do we need to do to improve our port infrastructure around the country as we increase the supply chains and build out?
Yeah, there are a number of big projects happening along the East Coast with respect to ports. We're involved in a project in Rhode Island in Providence Port. We're co-funding in a kind of public-private partnership with the state of Connecticut, the New London Pier. Some of we're making investments in New Jersey at Paulsboro and in the New Jersey Wind Port. Paul's in the Baltimore Harbor, Trade Point Atlantic, making investments there for staging of offshore wind. And some of our competitors or partners in the offshore wind space are making similar investments in other states. So there's quite a bit of infrastructure, one-time costs going into building up the capability of this industry. And I think it's important to recognize that, you know, this is a long-term play, a long-term solution, and we're making investments now that will make us competitive and less reliant on carbon fuels in the long term. We're not going to solve a 2021 winter crisis with offshore wind, but we might prevent a crisis in 2026 or 2029 if we invest now.
Thank you. So you all have recommended a number of things already. Extending tax credits for offshore wind. Ms. Eckel, you favored that, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
Along with reauthorizing and expanding the DOE research, development, demonstration of offshore wind technologies. Is that right?
That is correct.
Developing a national offshore wind transmission plan.
Yes.
Ensuring the U.S. territories that don't get a lot of attention, the territories can take advantage of offshore wind.
Yes.
Is that another recommendation?
Yes.
We talked about upgrading ports, coordinating the clean energy training programs to strengthen the diversity and inclusivity of the workforce. Is the clean energy and offshore wind industries, are they committed to doing that?
Yes.
And then encouraging the Department of Interior to take a regional approach to offshore wind leasing that minimizes the environmental impacts. You've discussed that a little bit already as well.
Absolutely.
That's terrific because that lines up with the major report issued last year from the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, where we surveyed businesses and manufacturers, labor leaders all across America on what is our plan of action, and so I'm glad that they're aligned there. In addition, I want to point out I totally agree with you on the grid interconnections, and if anyone wants to move that forward, there's a bill 4027, the Efficient Grid Interconnection Act, that should help folks. But it's been good to see the great interest in this hearing today, and good, clean offshore wind resources. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer.